Good afternoon, everybody. I guess depends on where you're watching from. It's still morning for
Still
you, isn't
morning
it?
for
Yeah.
me. Technically, it
It
is
is now
still
three
morning for
minutes
me.
after noon for me. So, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Lore You Know Skylands. Right now, we're doing episode 21, Chardunahae. Now,
Hey.
Sarah, you have to explain why was it, because in third edition, it was Dunane,
Hey.
and now it is
Dunan.
Chardunahae.
Dunan.
What the
Dunan.
heck?
Dunan. It was Dunan. Dunan.
Yeah,
Now the
so
H is
I'm
still
gonna
there.
zoom in here
I
on
think.
on the map.
Oh no, you're right. You're
Whoa.
right. There's an N there too. Oh
Yeah,
gosh. They flipped the
Dunane.
H, didn't they?
So way
Ah.
over on the west side of the continent,
Look
we've
at
got
this other guy. This
this.
peninsula.
Yeah,
Tiny peninsula here that I've alluded to many
it's
times.
true.
I I call it I've referred to it as the North Korea of Ghelspad. And not because um of the I refer to it that way because it's kind of a lawful evil government, and presumably North Korea is, if you were going to equate a real world government to D&D alignments, I would describe North Korea as lawful evil. And also because it's completely isolationist and no one knows what's happening behind the wall of,
Right.
you know, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, and it's a mystery, and we don't even know if Kim Jong Il is Kim Jong Un, Kim Jong whatever is alive right now.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a mystery. At last report, he was maybe alive. I don't even know anymore. But it's a mystery, and that's why I call Duhane or Chardunane or whatever you want to call it these days, kind of the North Korea Ghelspad, because it's behind this mystery wall, and we don't really know what's going on unless, of course, you read the lore books, and then they tell you what's going on. But it doesn't have active trade with the rest of Ghelspad. It's not Titan spawn for doing it. It does have alliances, but it's still kind of a bad place of mysteries. So originally, this was basically another country that worshipped Chardun, but it was called just Dunahnea. Chard. So we Dunahane was kind of how we said, and it was a clumsy word, and it was always this kind of threatening thing on the west coast of Ghelspad. Mostly because of one huge, massive, creepy feature, which is the border of this peninsula, running the entire 80 miles that cuts the peninsula from the rest of Ghelspad, is a giant wall, a la the wall of, that big frosty wall in Game of Thrones. Not quite so big as that,
Right.
but certainly as intimidating. And because while the icy wall in Game of Thrones is intimidating because it's really big and made of ice, this one's intimidating because while it's not so big, it is made of bones, which is a bit more intimidating, I think.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Like, how did they get that many bones? Um, eh, that's a lot, because 70, 80 miles of wall, and you figure it's not, one bone thick. It's very thick, it's very big. It
Yeah.
does have a gate, but it's hundreds of feet tall. Well, not hundreds of feet, but dozens of feet tall. It's very tall. I think good
Now,
100 feet
was it
tall.
built?
And
Does it say when the wall was built? Because if it was post Divine
post-war.
War, I can totally see there's a
Post-war.
lot of building
There's
material.
a lot of bodies. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're just gonna go to the pasturing fields and grab some corpses and throw
Right.
them up on the wall. But they clearly clean them first, because it's just bones. It's not like it's a zombie wall. It's a bone wall. And they apparently, according to the lore, started gathering these bones in AV 65. So they haven't quite been building this thing for 100 years. Um, and they're still building it too, which is super creepy. So presumably every year it gets a little taller. I mean,
Yeah.
I think they got the width pretty early, but they're just building up and building wider and taller and creepier. Um, and yeah. um, so originally it was human worshippers of Chardun, and when you read the original lore, and they give it a population of 1 million people, which is alarming,
Yeah.
and it's described as 54% human, and then a scattering of dwarves and elves and half-orcs. It doesn't specify the type of dwarf, but presumably it's Charduni dwarf, as it is described in more detail, and the thing is Charduni dwarf just specify in the population descriptor in the original lore. This was retconned heavily, heavily. Oops, my map is wiggling. This was retconned heavily in the new book. They changed the name and the spelling. So instead of Duhane, it's Chardunahae. Now it's Chardun, Chardun, our god of lawful evilness. And they dropped the other N, and instead of HNEA, it's now HEA. So Chardunahae. I guess it's a little bit easier to pronounce without that little awkward N at the end. And they just explicitly stuck Chardun at the beginning. It's like, I get, maybe they're competing with Hadrad.
Yeah, right. Well, we can name our whole country after our god, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know, but they explicitly stuck that in it. But the other thing they did, which is the bigger retcon, I think, is they changed it from being 54% human, run by a lawful evil human, to more like 54% Charduni, explicitly, and run by a Charduni dwarf.
Yeah.
Who coincidentally has the same exact name and alignment and descriptor as the original ruler. So presumably it's just like, you're not human anymore, now you're short.
Maybe he was a very short, or he's a very tall dwarf, and so there was confusion in the beginning. They were like, oh, he's totally human. Oh, no, he's a dwarf.
No, he's a dwarf. He was always a dwarf. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it maps, and I think it makes the Charduni a little more interesting. It gives it more of a explanation to my thought, because they ruled Ghelspad for a not really long time, like compared to like every other conquering nation that ruled Ghelspad. See Empire of Lead, 6,000 years. See Stewart Empire, 10,000 years. Charduni, like 50 years. I don't know the exact numbers. It's not nearly as long. Maybe 100 years. But not as long. They stomp, conquer 70% of Ghelspad. Divine War happens, and then retreat.
Right.
This is pretty much what they have left, and that is implied in the old book that this is where they went, and yet it is an explicit. So I think it was kind of a retcon from the original Ghelspad campaign setting book, which was, admittedly, as we said many times, one of the early-ish books that came out for Scarred Lands, not the earliest, but one of the earlier ones. And they just went, you know what, it kind of makes sense to map this as where the Charduni dwarves are now. And I like that. This is one of those retcons that I approve. This makes sense to me.
There's definitely we've talked about it before, where in the old stuff there are those contradictions between books, and sometimes within the same books. And this is one of those times where the retcon actually fixes that.
I think this retcon fixes that. Yeah, because where did all those Charduni dwarves go? They're not just some minority in Galastia. They are a minority in Galastia, but that's not the only place they went.
Right.
And you're not gonna run into very many Charduni wandering around Vesh.
Right.
Or Derekeen. It's just not. They're not. I wouldn't say they're not welcome.
Yeah.
Not to say that every Charduni dwarf is a worshipper of Chardun.
Right.
Any more than every Manticora is a worshipper of Angle.
Right.
But because and just to be clear, Charduni dwarfs were made by Chardun. Like, they are one of the clearly divine races that.
Right.
Like humans and halflings.
Yeah.
We're divine. No,
and the Manticora is a great example, because just like the Manticora, they've been like, we're not gonna follow Vangal anymore because he's kind of a douche.
Yeah, but I would say that a good 80% of the Charduni population still follow Chardun.
Yeah,
unlike the Manticora, where it's like
they're building a wall of bone. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the Charduni follow Chardun.
Right.
And I'd say minority of Manticora still follow Vangal. Definitely minority of Chardun don't follow Chardun.
Right.
And in fact, most of the Charduni you'll find actually in Termana, which is where they came from. So that's where they have a whole empire in Termana. They still hold that land, presumably. Then again, we haven't seen 5th edition Termana retcons yet, so who knows what that's going to do. Throw away Forsaken and Forsworn. At least the dates. At least the dates. But someday, maybe, if I let you. But for Ghelspad, I'd say the majority of the Charduni population in this country of. So the new book doesn't say a heck of a lot. They list, yes, mostly Charduni. It's ruled by this guy. Chardun is worshipped there. There's a wall of bones. It's also really got a really high population of goblins. As I implied last week, a lot of goblins in that southwest corner of Ghelspad. That's where you'd find goblin country along the Devil's March and Fangspal Peninsula. But the rest are in the mountains of Charduni. Okay, they describe it as lots of mines, and yet you look at the map and there's none of those little mountain
Oh, like
icons.
right.
it's like okay, there's giant mountain icons, and they're flat. So I don't know, but there's a lot of mines nevertheless. So I guess they're strip mines. I don't know.
Yeah, I have to wonder because like the art from the original book has this scene, and essentially it's like describing what each of these characters is because they had different roles and such, and they have like the goblin miner, and they have like a human slave person that's coming out of the mine, and then they have like the Charduni taskmaster, and in the back you have like these writers. I think they're both human. But
because of course back then
the mine itself, first of all, there's skulls laying around it, so is it near the bone wall? Who knows? But it doesn't look like it's in a mountain. It's more like here is this slight bulge in the ground, and they just dug into it, and so it could very well be that there might be some like rolling hills, but there aren't mountains like you think of dwarves mining mountains and stuff. Not that kind of thing.
Yeah, you don't get that sense that there's it's pretty flat lands, and it's nasty. I mean, this whole landscape. I mean, you get nasty badlands throughout Ghelspad. You know, compared to the Blood Steppes, which is just pretty much every badland you can think of. Blood Steppes has geysers and canyons, and it is in no way steppe-like. About that in Vigilant. This is similar. It's like just there's nothing really pleasant in Chardonnay. You don't run into like, oh look, rolling fields of farmland. No.
Yeah.
It's like icky canyons and swamps, and it's hot and humid, and there's these like sulfuric acid things, and just it is unpleasant. And this is where all the goblins went, because it sucks to be a goblin in any fantasy universe, and this is where they, this is like the Mordor of not minus Sauron and Mount Doom, but this is sort of the Mordor of Ghelspad in that regard, of just like desolate, not much.
Not a great vacation spot.
No, unless you're an earth elemental, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. They're all laying back in their acid pools.
Yeah.
Getting my scrub on.
I don't know who'd want to go there. It's unpleasant. So, and it's completely tyrannically ruled by the priesthood of Chardun. They do have a caste system there, so it's pretty, like, not a lot of things. It's priests, what they call the Charth, which is sort of the kind of nobility. Not to say they really have a king per se. And I don't know how this retcon, and this is original lore, I don't know how this will retcon, because I would think it would map more to the way the Charduni Empire works in Termana, whereas the one in white who's like their high uber priest, and whether they have something that they would have some equivalent now if you were to expand this lore. I that's what I would do. If I would map it a little bit closer to that, given that it's now supposed to be led by the Charduni. But in either case, the original mapping, I think it still applies in terms of, it's like the priesthood, kind of a middle tier of managers. They have the military, and then everyone else is pretty much a slave. So there's not a lot of where's the room for merchants? They
Right.
don't really have trade. um, and the slave population is obscenely huge. Chardun is, as a god, is known as the slaver, so this maps to that. But slavery is touched upon a little bit in Calastia, but it's like, yes, they exist, but it's not, it's certainly not a majority of the population, and it's like kind of for specific things, and they're kind of universal about it, and like, you were a criminal, therefore you are going to work. Um, they don't, it's not like your children are automatically slaves or anything like that in Calastia. Um, so it doesn't have quite that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's horrible, but it doesn't quite have that overwhelmingness.
Right.
Whereas this place is like that. If you're a goblin, this is what you are. If you're, whatever you're gonna be in this area, this is your life, and this is the life of your kids, and forever, and there's no slave rebellions or anything goes on here very well. It's pretty awful. There's also no support network. They're so isolated from the rest of Ghelspad that, with the possible exception of some pirates in the area that may be, chaotic neutral or chaotic good pirates who are like, we'll help you by boat, that's really the only direction you can leave, because you're not getting past that wall of bones, and so sea is the only way you can go to leave this peninsula. So it's, and there are places you could conceivably go, Fang's Fall or Derkeem, but it's rough, man.
And when you look at the map, it's not like swimming to safety is really a close thing either. Even if you like jump off at the wall, it's still not. Yeah. And then you just have the the desert,
because you've got the Erkruden Desert.
Right.
Basically, everything to the east of this wall is the Erkruden Desert, which, unless you're a Sutak or an Ironbred, you're not going to survive.
Yeah.
Unless you're already made for heat, you're not going to survive. So there's nowhere really to go. So it's just the land of awful. And unless you're one of the priests or one of these Charth class on the military, and that's kind of the only way out is through the military. So it's pretty awful. But their slogan, Chardun rewards only those who prove themselves through trial and hardship. So that's kind of the only way out.
Yeah.
Joining their army. And not to say they're fighting a lot of stuff either.
Not currently,
which is interesting. They haven't. I mean, they started building the wall, I said 80 years ago, but they've completely isolated themselves from the rest of Ghelspad. So every once in a while they send like assistance to Calastia, because they are allied with Calastia. Clearly, that alliance is there. And I'm sure there's some kind of embassy thing with Calastia, but that's it. That's really their only ally. Yeah, I mean, allies are... Actually, it says allies none in the old book. Our new book says Calastia. So
gotcha.
Not a lot.
Right.
Enemies, it says none, too, because of the isolationists. And I think they would have enemies, except no one wants to go near there. It's sort of like, there's a desert in the way, and... Yeah, presumably there's a country over there somewhere. I don't know, it's creepy.
I mean, why would you conquer a crap hole? So...
Yeah.
I think everyone's just satisfied with leaving them to their stuff, and as long as they stay over there, who cares?
Yeah. So it's pretty awful.
Yeah.
In terms of what they have for resources, as I said, you've got like these kind of just luck. They do have some things, which they've got as with mining, which is pretty extensive. Gold, iron, oil, which is fascinating to me that this is listed as a commodity. which means they've figured out how to use it.
Yeah.
Not a common thing in fantasy
Yeah.
universes. Use of oil, the most you'd ever imagine in fantasies, I think maybe was burning it for light or heat.
Right.
And presumably they figured out how to use it. So North Korea and Texas combined. They've got oil springs, or Saudi Arabia, I don't know. So they've got oil springs anyway. And but they've also got this wonderful place that I love called the Burning Swamp.
Yeah. Down there on the south end of the map. That sounds pleasant.
I imagine from the Princess Bride, Fire Swamp.
Right.
Yeah, minus probably the ROUSs, although I'm sure there's something else more horrible than giant rats. Giant rats would just be like, what would you feed us? Whereas here it's just sort of just monsters probably. But it's normal swamp, right? But not a normal swamp, because instead of like methane swamp gases, it's like oily, and that's where they get the oil resources, and it's like very flammable. Like there's this fog, which I don't know if this makes sense in terms of actual physics, but magic, hand wave, a wizard did it. You can just, you wander in this swamp and like don't light a match, because it will explode. Or what would be a match? Don't cast a cantrip. It's like a flammable fog that explodes. That's fun. And they send the slaves in there to, I guess, extract the oil, but a lot of them just don't make it because fire swamp. So, yuck. And then they re-emerge as Tarfiends, which is one of my favorite undead from Scarred Lands. I'll talk about my actual favorite undead next week, but one of my favorite undead, which is, bad dude Chardun, he raises you as a Charfiend, which is basically a Chardun undead thing. And they just kind of, and half of the servants around here are like undead, because there you go, lots of necromancy in this whole general region.
And the art that's on the screen, I'm pretty sure it's the guy in the front, because I know it says in the description for the art, but it doesn't necessarily specify which, but I'm pretty sure it's the ugly guy in the front.
I don't know which art you're showing.
It's
the one from page 70?
Well, let me double check. You keep talking while I look.
Yeah. If you're talking about the one from, anyway, lots of necromancers.
72, yeah.
72, yeah. Oh, 72.
I've got the...
Oh, that one. Oh, yeah. Yes, that one right behind the goblin. No, the Charfiend is the one behind the goblin. It's not that one.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said Charduni Slain.
The Charduni Slain. The one in the front is, I think, some kind of orc or goblin. The one right behind
it, the half-orc soldier,
that looks like the blood coming from the eye.
That's the Charduni Slain.
That's
gotcha.
The Charduni Slain. Yeah. Yeah. So not the one dead in the front.
So the one that's wearing the Viking horn helmet with the big gash in it.
That's a field commander, and then a slave, and then who's a slave in the army, so slave or regular, and then the Charduni Slain, and then the very front is a half-orc soldier. And again, they mention half-orcs as a high population here. I think, again, before we had orcs as playable, most of the time when you see half-orcs mentioned, replaced with orc.
Yeah.
Except for in the Scar, probably. Which I talked about a couple weeks ago. So I'd say there's a lot of orcs there, obviously a lot of Chardunan dwarves, a lot of humans, and lots and lots of goblins. And hobgoblins and bugbears that aren't mentioned, but when you say goblins, you can just throw that in there. If you need a taller goblin, make it a bugbear. Or a goblin with a higher CR. That's my thing. Anyway, talking about locations. So, we had the Burning Swamp. Another messed up, interesting spot, the Valley of Serpents, which is not what you think, when you hear serpent, I automatically go to Mormau. No, not in this case. In fact, there aren't really any snakes there at all. It's just kind of it's a bit of a misnomer. There's this stuff that grows there, one of the only areas that has verdant growth, called serpent vines. which are, I believe, in the creature collection, or the old creature collection. Not sure if they showed up in the new one. Which are a kind of a carnivorous plant. But if you're careful and you know what you're doing, you can get things from them that are sort of edible. Sort of on a stretch. Or if you're a hardy goblin with a really good constitution, they make these food that you can get. I think it's melons or something from the serpent vines. And that's like one of their major food sources in this country is carnivorous plant fruit.
I mean, of any country, it makes sense that this would be the one. But still.
Where you mostly live on carnivorous plant fruit. like I just picture like these sort of weird honeydew watermelon things. Like, I got one.
Serpent root
like,
is in the.
You know.
Oh, sorry. Serpent root is in the 5th edition creature collection.
It isn't. Yeah, serpent root is in the. Can you describe the?
It is a CR3, first of all. So, like, you don't just have commoners out there harvesting the stuff, or you do, and you like, it can only attack so many of them at a time. So, so it's a dense patch of foliage. It grows thick with deep green, flat-bladed leaves and clusters of knobby brown roots that spread through the immediate area. If a creature approaches, the roots shudder and begin to rise, seeking out new prey. Yay! What do these things do?
Just nasty. But this is the majority of food in the country. It's from these horrible vines. And they're called, I believe they're called serpent vines because they kind of sound like a hissing, like snake hissing noise is the sound they make. Like, I guess it's the vines rubbing together or something like that. But they're a bit animated. They can move, you know, a la, you know, a carnivorous plant. Can't walk, but they can, you know, reach out and grab you the way you see so many.
Yeah, and so they grab you, and then they constrict you, like they hold you, and then they suck your life out, dealing necrotic damage. So it's not even like they just squish you; they're like draining your life. That's highly unpleasant.
You throw a slave at them, they grab the poor, pathetic goblin. Well, it's nomming on the goblin, then you run in and grab the melons. I guess. I don't know. It just sounds horrible. So if you want to subject your PCs to just a horrible place, or a horrible place as a low-level party to escape from, you can go to Chardunahae.
Yeah. Or if you ever want, like, someone to sneak in and try and kill your PCs in a weird way, be like, a Charduni gardener is outside your window planting some wonderful plants, and then that night...
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I did send my players there once. I can't remember why. I did use this setting once in my 20-year whatever campaign. But it wasn't just, it didn't feel like a really substantial pop. It just, like, unless you're going in there to get some kind of MacGuffin, it doesn't feel like a place you want to adventure. It's like, could there be lost weird things? Yes, but
yeah.
I mean, I think it would be an interesting start, like we're escaping or something like that. But it doesn't feel, or we're going in there, or we've been captured by them and need to escape or something like that. For that, so there's that business, but I don't think it's not as interesting as like, oh, Colostia, there's these ruins and there's things, and this doesn't have that kind of vibe. I mean, there's just this intimidating giant wall of bones. Although there's some implication that because of the heavy necromancy they have, that maybe this wall of bones could be this giant undead construct monster.
Yeah.
That rampages across the Earth for reasons.
They just gotta pull the ripcord and there it goes.
Yeah. There is one instance in the lore, in the meta lore, where it talks about that sort of thing happened. and it comes from Because of the Past, which is one of my favorite like meta lore books because I love the Silurians. And while the Silurians don't really have anything to do directly with this country, and this is a big spoiler country, spoiler alert, we're playing campaign, the Return of the Silurians. This is a big spoiler alert. So don't listen if you're in that campaign. But in the meta lore, which is like sort of a, hey GM, here's an idea, not meta lore as in this is canon,
right?
Or this actually happened in the history, but just if you wanted to run the Return of the Silurians, here's a potential plot thread. I'm desperately looking for the page. There's a potential plot line you could do. They talk about the Silurians basically taking over, waking up, and the Uthriac waking up and taking over central Ghelspad. Over the course of like 2 years, they run this. Assuming starting in AB 150, which is pretty much where things start in the Scarred Lands. This is, These adventures happen, and in this meta lore, in AB 152, so 2 years into the Silurians are back, the Wall of Bones open, and out pours Chardun himself, leading his army that he's been building behind this Wall of Bones for 100 years, march upon the Silurian power within the Urkruden. So that's a thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's creepy.
Yeah, even if you didn't do the Silurian part of it, I could totally see that's what the Charduni are doing. They are like rebuilding their empire, starting there, and they're just like building up their forces. And one day that gate will open, and everyone on the other side is going to be like, "Oh, fuck."
Yeah, yeah. The day that he's finally like, because a lot of his effort, Chardun, that is, the god, has been put on Verduk. He's after the Divine War, he kind of, literally the word used was forsaken. He sort of forsake the Charduni. He's just sort of like, you didn't do that well. I'm going with the humans over here because they seem to have their shit together. And the Charduni are like, but you made us.
My mistake.
He sort of basically pulled a Mormo.
Yeah.
Where she's like, I'm abandoning the Asathina. I'm gonna go hang out with these Yuan-Ti for a while.
Right.
And he made the Charduni, and he builds this whole empire in Termana, and then he helps them invade Ghelspad, and they run all over the place, and then the war happens, and then he sends these loyal dwarves to fight for him, the Divine War, and they get their asses kicked. I mean, they win in the end, but the Charduni armies are annihilated. There's like, and I'm using that in the terms of decimated, like 90% of them lost. So the survivors limped their way into this little crappy country. And then instead of Chardun like helping them out and giving them stuff and props and everything for doing such a great job in the war, he's just like, now I'm gonna hang out with this human emperor and help him conquer. And spends the next 150 years helping Verduk's family spread the word of him throughout southeastern Ghelspad and the Charduni Empire, or the Calastian Empire. Sorry, Calastian Empire. So he kind of abandons them. So that would be an interesting switch if in the meantime the Charduni are like, sorry master, we did you poorly, we're rebuilding our armies and we'll be badass again, but I do like that idea though, that Chardun himself would lead these words and worshipers.
Doesn't the Divine Treaty essentially state that they can't step foot on the planet? So you would have to like kind of,
well, they can send their avatar.
That is fair. So it could be an avatar, but not like his actual being is there. But no one wants to fuck with that too, so...
Yeah, divine avatars are nothing to sneeze at. We're still talking CR 30, the old 3.5 days. We're still talking between CR 30 and CR 40. They're not... they're more badass than just about any hero you're going to find out there. If you wanted to match in terms of CR and challenge ratings, and 3.5 are.
Yeah.
You can't. It's like you can't. It's like, what's your hit dice? I don't know, 5,000.
Or the opposite. We were doing some recent project conversions, and there was one that was like a CR5, and it had like 20 hit points. I'm like, no, that's not
No,
how that works.
that's not how it works anymore. CR5's gotta have at least 300, right? No, no. Realistically, a CR5 is gotta at least have 60, 70 hit points in
Something.
5th edition.
Yeah.
Something like that. So, but in any case, if you look at what's described for an Uthriac in this book, and what's shown for God in the Define and the Defeated book, they're about the equivalent, or God's avatar, I should say, God's avatar. Unless you're looking at Drondari, it makes no sense. Their CRs are about equivalent. Yeah, running in the mid 30s. So, but again, how accurate those are, who knows? But equivalent in terms of hit dice and attack bonuses and damage if you just look at the numbers. So Divine Avatar is badass, and I wouldn't want to fuck with one.
Yeah.
And certainly, yeah, you're not gonna. And I don't know how that's gonna run in 5th edition, having not played Tier 3 yet. Never mind Epic.
It's interesting. I mean, you really, as a DM, if you want things to be challenging and higher, you have to it has to be about tactics. It's not so much about my monster is like 4 CRs above your. It doesn't matter. They will raffle stomp it. They're just like, or whatever, meteor swarm or whatever.
They might raffle stomp, but then again, they might get their ass kicked depending on how the circumstances are.
True.
Because, yeah, I've hit TPKs in 5th edition, and it is possible. It is hard. It is hard to do a TPK, but it is possible. Like, oops.
Yeah.
Have a cleric in the party next time. Actually, that's really all you need to do is not have a cleric in the party. Not have a healer in the party. TPK, no, let's heal. Yeah. So make sure to have a druid, cleric, or some other healing class in your D&D party, lest you run out of practice. So anyway, I love that idea. I love that vibe of Chardun leading an army of something out of this gate, whether or not he's actually supporting the Charduni in Chardunahae right now. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's a cool meta lore. I think that's a neat little something.
Totally.
And as I said before, pretty much the country is 100% worshipping of Chardun, at least in those terms of the leadership. There's one of the coolest buildings to him is in the capital city of Dun. Great name, very boring, very simple. Which is on this little hill along the splintered river, and is this the one that's? Yeah, it's basically one building, if I recall correctly. The entire metropolis is contained within one enormous temple dedicated to Chardun. That's kind of funky.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other cities that are basically one thing, but it's like it's a mountain, like Brocktorn is the city of the dwarves, but it's in a mountain.
Yeah.
So it still has multiple structures, even though it's just dug out of a mountain. This is apparently one just massive, one enormous temple. So it's either the temple is sprawling multiple buildings, or the whole city is built within one massive building. It's not clear, and the description's very vague, but it is described as there being a bunch of towers. So, and they're kind of named after various things you do following. Tower of Ambition, the Tower of Might, Tower of Necromancy, the Tower of Pain. Yeah, I want a vacation there. Tower of Domination, the Tower of Avarice. Avarice?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's one of the things you want your followers to be like. Avarice.
all surrounded by the walls of truth and the eternal cathedral of Chardun, which is apparently his main temple here in this country. So that's fun. and they're really big into architecture. Like it's talked about pretty extensively as the architecture here. It's like, okay, you really wouldn't want to go here as a tourist, but you would love a photo album. I know. I want a picture of the Wall of Bones. I want postcards of this temple. I don't actually want to go there, but it would be neat to have a photo book. That's probably it. I don't know. As I said, but it sounds cool as a kind of fucked up temple. And then there's a few other cities mentioned, like, oh, this one's in the middle of the swamp, and this one's is where you go through the Tower of Bones that controls the gateway through the tower. And other places. Interesting. Why Inferno Gulf is called Inferno Gulf? Like, I don't know. Why is Inferno Gulf?
I've never found a reason. I'm assuming that it is not a pleasant place.
Yeah. It's not. It doesn't get an entry, I don't think. No. So, I don't know why, other than I know the swamps of the fire swamp thing goes into that area. So my only thought is maybe there's that oily stuff is going into that gulf and maybe setting the water on fire or something.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Like
either from the swamp or even from, vents that are in the gulf themselves. Like when in the real world, when oil rigs go up, that is not a pleasant thing. So if there's anything similar, like whether there were rigs or whether it's just like a natural formation that there is burning oil in that would be a terrible place to visit.
Yeah. I know it's not due to volcano. There's no volcano, no known volcanic anything there. There's sulfur springs, but they're not due to, not actually sulfur. It's not sulfur, it's oil. There's oily crap.
Yeah.
But there's no
friend message in chat.
Methane.
Yeah.
Gas in front. There's methane gas, but there's no tectonic, stuff going on. There's no volcanic anything or anything like that. So it's just methane gas and oily stuff. So what did Fran say?
Fran mentioned in chat that the oil from the swamp drains. She doesn't remember where she read it though.
Oh, okay. The oil from the swamp drains in there.
Somewhere in there.
So I just imagine that, and they do say sailors and pirates do not go in Infernal Gulf. It's just a bad idea.
Well, let's go sail your wooden ship through, pooled oil and burnable material, and oops, somebody threw the cigar or whatever over. Someone was smoking their pipe, and boom.
Yeah. Or a fire priest,
right?
Cleric or wizard. So
watch this.
Nasty. So that's probably why it's called Inferno. It maps, but I'm just saying, if you think it's lava, it's not lava.
Right.
Yeah. And if I've implied it's lava in previous episodes, I was wrong.
I don't think it was stated when we mentioned it before. I don't think so. I think we were just talking about it's not a pleasant place to go.
It's not a pleasant place to go. So, so that's pretty much there. The only other, I think I can always think of something, but the one other thing would be the Splintered River, which does run through, part of it runs through Chardunahae. Called the Splintered River because they know that the two ends on the other side of the Ukruden do connect, but it's all like underground. So it's kind of a funky, like it goes underground and then it comes back up and surfaces right before the Wall of Bones and then crosses through the Wall of Bones. Theoretically, that could be a way through the wall, is via the river. But I imagine that's very well guarded.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it'd be pretty easy to just have, like, a gate or have just built the wall over it so you can't sail through it. Trade-wise, that would suck if they are, like, we do need, like, macaroons from the neighbors or something. Like, too bad, walk it in.
There is no mention of trade. If there's any trade, it's going to be on the North Shore via ship. And I imagine there's some. Like, we want oil in Derakeen.
Yeah. I feel like they would have the upper hand in trade if they wanted it. Not saying that they would, because it's the Charduni. Do they want, this kind of exposure to the outside world and all that?
Yeah. Now, in my meta plot,
yeah,
my personal headcanon is that there is some kind of permanent magic gate between Chardunahae and the Charduni Empire in Termana.
Oh, like a teleportation circle type.
Like a teleportation circle kind of thing, yeah. Now, 3.5 didn't have teleportation circles, and the introduction of teleportation circles in 5th edition is, like, there aren't permanent circles all over Ghelspad.
Right.
Like, at all.
Yeah, this is a new thing.
They haven't been made yet. It's a new thing. I mean, it's like AB 150. Some wizard in the Phylacteric Vault discovers the spell.
Yeah.
Like, nobody knows it.
Well,
so
and
it's new and
going back to the Silurians, they had
but
technology that could do it. So it could be that wizard was like, I'm dissecting this gate, and figured it out that way.
Because the Silurians had teleportation gates.
Right.
So I imagine, and again, this is my personal thing, that there is some kind of permanent teleportation gate thing, transportation ability between this country in Western Ghelspad and the empire that's in the southeast or east coast of Termana, which is southeast, thousands of miles southeast of Ghelspad. So opposite ends of their respective continents, and 3,000 miles between them or more, depending on whose map you're looking at. They gotta talk, and I can't imagine just sending spells. So I think they have some kind of teleportation thing, but that's again 100% my headcanon, and I just do it for convenience sake, because I imagine they send resources back and forth, because who else are they going to trade with?
Right.
Tenuous alignment with Calastia, and that's it. And maybe some merchants who are just groovy enough to be like, we'll give you, apples from Derrakeen for oil.
I mean, I guess it depends. They're just like, all we have are these fucking serpent vine melons. I will absolutely get apples from you. Who knows?
Yeah, but I can't imagine. Yeah, because Derrakeen, that's that continent, or not continent, that country to north, and Derrakeen's got its own messed up stuff, which we'll get to in some future episode. Because they're not exactly, they don't have their shit together either. But yeah, so
right there.
There's not much else going on.
Yeah,
so that's my headcanon, is that they've got some kind of permanent thing with the Charduni Empire in Termana. At minimum, I'm sure they chat.
Yeah.
Even outside a permanent gate, I'm sure they have some kind of magical sending thing, because they're all clerics, and high level clerics can do that shit. So, I'm sure the what's his title? Lord High Priest and First Minister has chatsies with the one in white. Anyway, or his major peeps. So I think I've exhausted this. Is there anything else I missed?
Oh, the one thing I was going to mention was the scepters. So they have the armed forces of Chardunahae is composed of 12 scepters of about 21,000 soldiers. They're scattered throughout the country, but each one has a point. Like each scepter has an assignment, essentially, and it says there are 12, but it only lists 5, and I think it's because those 5 are like, this is your job. Like, as the Golden Scepter, they were originally composed of the soldiers who survived the Divine War. They were garrisoned in the city of Dune.
So that's an interesting thing. So if originally they were mostly humans, and these are the guys who survived,
right?
That means they're over 150 years old. You figured they had to be at least
19
when they served. So these are 107-year-old people.
And that could be a good chunk of why they were like, this makes no sense. We're gonna make them dwarves.
Well, or they could have been necromancers.
That's also
they're all
fair.
liches.
Yeah, liches.
Like either they're liches or they're dwarves,
Yeah.
which makes more sense.
Yeah.
Because dwarves live to be 300, 400, 500 years old.
Yeah.
So I think the dwarves maps.
And he does talk about the adamant, not the adamantine, but the adamant scepter
Adamant.
is essentially the
Yeah.
naval power. They guard Urtik, which is that
It's just
on
a
the
port.
map it doesn't make as much sense because they're guarding Urtik, but Urtik isn't actually on the coast in the map. It's like inland a bit, so maybe
What map are you?
the one that's on screen, the one that still calls
I
it
know it's screen
Dunahae.
up because
Dunahae.
Oh, this map. Yeah. It's on the Infernal Gulf, which is interesting because it's in that inlet.
Right.
So you'd think the north end would have better ports, but I think the north end is not accessible because it's all cliffy. It's all,
That makes sense. Yeah.
jagged rockland.
Yeah, if you've ever seen the Cliffs of
and-
Moher from Ireland, you don't go up and just like park your boat
Yeah.
and unload stuff there. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, so this port still has to navigate through part of Infernal Gulf.
Yeah.
Just the very western end of it, but still.
Yeah, and I'm assuming if you
Unpleasant.
went west, it would be better than getting near the burning swamp with your
Yeah.
wooden boat.
Yeah. If you went further east from that port is not a thing. But yeah, you're looking at the map that they cover. So yeah, all those locations are.
And you were talking about the slaves that they send into the burning swamp. Those are guarded by the flaming scepter. Among the
Flaming
unluckiest of the scepters. They are guarded with.
We get to go in the
What's
swamp
that?
and fight off.
Right? They're charged with guarding the slaves. So not only like do they have to prevent monsters from eating the people who are getting the oil, but what a shitty job to begin with. You're going in and like shit might explode. You can't smoke
And
your
you
pipe.
can't-
You can't.
You can't kill the serpent vines because they're making the food. So you're just sort of
Right?
beat them back without actually harming them. Just sort of like
Yeah.
sit.
And there's
Let's
like
get your
in
fruit.
movies where like the vines are coming in trying to get you, everyone always has a flamethrower, right? So they're out there with the flamethrower and it doesn't kill the plant, it just drives it back. You don't do that in the burning swamp because it'll blow up.
Blow up. How do you hold back the serpent vine? I mean, just imagine like how you grow tomato plants and you have those stalks.
Yeah.
And you like stick those in for like the baby serpent vine. I'm sure it works when they're little, but as soon as they get big enough and can start moving around on their own, they're just gonna like break the little stalks and
Yeah.
I don't know, throw them back at you or something. I don't know how. Like I don't want to farm
Yeah.
sentient killer plants that will choke me and
Right.
eat me and
Better just get the apples from Dairy King.
pretty much.
So then there's the leaden scepter.
Remind.
They're responsible for maintaining the mining operators, and it says here in the northern Badlands, so that might help understand where those minings. If anyone's ever been to the Badlands in like South Dakota, they're not so much rolling hills. There are some like areas that are like raised, but a lot of it is like
It's not completely flat.
right, right. More like those like broken canyons. Not like, we're not talking like Grand Canyon size, but just like
No.
small canyons that go down. I could totally see like the dwarves are down in there mining down into that ground. And
Well, the dwarves are not mining. They're
right.
in charge of the
Telling
people
their
mining,
slaves
yeah.
right to mine in there. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And the final scepter listed is the bone scepter, which patrols the length of the wall of bones.
Yeah. Which that's the, what do they call the Game of Thrones? The black something.
Oh man, it's not coming to mind. All I can remember is you know nothing, Jon Snow. So I am currently Jon Snow.
Yeah.
Of the scepters, I feel like this is the one you want to be in because you're just like, I just hang out over here, like
On this wall of bone that
Right.
I'm just
But they're into that
like,
kind of thing,
sleeping
so-
on the wall and like turning over in the middle of the night and opening your eyes and looking at a skull.
Right.
I mean,
it'll be
not
fine.
pleasant. Yeah, no, not pleasant. And what do they use as mortar between the mortar
Right.
between
Well, see, it just lends
the
to that idea
stones?
that there's like necromancy involved, where they're just like,
There's
okay,
gotta be
you hang on to you, and the skeletons
yeah,
are just like, okay, and just go to sleep until we need you. Good
yeah.
job.
So I just imagine like the whole thing would I don't know, giant walking wall of undeadness.
Yeah, there was
Cool.
a third edition of 3.5 monster that was essentially like a wall of bones. It was an animated, but it was a lot smaller. It was like,
You would think, yeah,
yeah,
it's not 80 miles
it
long.
was kind
Yeah.
of like the spell wall of fire. It was like that
Mhm.
width instead of miles.
Well, it's still like 100. Wall of fire can get 100 feet long if you're high enough level.
Right.
In
Let's
those
see.
3-5 days.
All right. So looking at the legend here, whoop. Like that wall is what, over 100 miles long?
I estimated 80 based on
Yeah.
my legend on my map, which is not an accurate map, by the way. This one is better, and this one has. Still, I think it's still about
Yeah, 80, 80 to 100 miles of bones.
80, yeah.
Holy shit. Yeah. That's so many bones.
Beach to beach. That's a lot of bones. And the thing, and what gets me is, not 1,000 miles away, you've got the Mounds of Man, which is also a giant pile of bones that, that they've built in little hills.
Right.
So those are more zombies, I think.
Literally,
those are just bodies.
mounds of man.
But this whole zone, this whole coast, and we'll talk about it later with Hollowfaust, is like necromancy central.
Oh yeah, they love it over here.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I would not be surprised if they just went out into various battlefields throughout the West Coast and just ordered the dead to walk and just to come follow me. And there's like, and they got to the border, and they go, lie down.
Right. Everyone hug. Good job.
Yes. And brought the undead in. They didn't actually carry them, So, but yeah, and how many died in the Accrugen for there to be this much material?
Right.
Yeah. And presumably anybody who's died in this country since they started building that, they've just, your convenient
checked
body.
them in there, right? Especially the slaves.
First we turn you into charred and slain, and then when you've kind of done your job, we take what's left of you and throw you into the wall.
Right.
Okay, I'm getting creeped out, so and we want to move on to another topic, right?
I mean, can you imagine the fact that there might just be slaves that are like, their whole point is to breed to make more skeletons for the wall? That's pretty fucked up. Anyway, on that happy note. So, if you're watching live, what we're going to do is take a really short break and come back and talk about Lokiel. If you're not watching live, watch the next episode, which will go live at the same time as this one. Because we are ending this technical episode here, Sarah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm going to try to make it quick. This is about when people stop watching, and then Sarah Stewart wrote this book, Vigilant, Through Shadows and Dreams Book 1. It's a book of Scarred Lands. Also knows a lot about the Scarred Lands. Just my camera, good job. And have a bunch of stuff on Drive-Thru RPG for the Scarred Lands, including a bunch of stuff about pirates. So check it out.
Yeah.
Drive-Thru. And my website is more like this, industries.com.
Yay. And if you're watching on YouTube, scroll down to the links. Yay. And I am Jeremy Hochhalter. I am the host here on this here channel on Twitch. You can find me on Twitter at WHPubs, on Facebook at WH Publications. You can go to WHPublications.com and see all of the stuff that I have published over on DM's Guild and what's the other one? Drive-Thru RPG. There's so many places. Stay tuned. We're going to kick over to a shorter chat about Lokiel. It didn't really... Well, we'll talk about that when we get there. And if you're not watching live, then we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.